A new study was just published to Medium, analyzing hundreds of headlines from the 2020 primary, sort of trying to quantify exactly how biased the reporting against Bernie Sanders during the primary was. It was done by a graduate of the University of Washington, and it tracks the headlines of 7 mainstream sources over 6 weeks of coverage: MSN, CNN, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, New York Times, Politico, and the LA Times. If you remember the In These Times study that tracked the positive and negative coverage of Biden, Sanders, and Warren on MSNBC, this study seems to have been inspired by that, though this only covers Biden and Bernie. And the findings are interesting, not necessarily surprising. So you can see in the first week of analysis, January 19th to the 25th, 2 weeks before the Iowa caucus, the majority of Bernie's coverage was already way negative, whereas Biden's coverage was majority positive, and by a bigger margin. And the week leading up to the Iowa caucus, the margin actually grew. Now, what would be interesting to see is historical data on the correlation between caucus outcomes and media coverage. Because in this case, the legacy media analyzed here was 67% negative for Bernie and 71% positive for Biden. And despite this, Bernie won the popular vote in Iowa and beat Biden by double. Now, leading up to New Hampshire, the coverage had actually flipped briefly. Bernie had just essentially won the first state, even though many people liked that Mayor Pete had done better in some fatuous delegate math, and at that point, people were kind of dark on Biden. But the negative coverage picked up again immediately. The next 2 weeks of coverage of Bernie became a bloodbath, as he both became the frontrunner and won Nevada. Now, I suspect that if you did a similar study for past elections, you wouldn't find so much room between the frontrunner and the temperature of their coverage. But here, the negative coverage was ostensibly a response to Bernie's success. But here's the most alarming fact. Remember that even though Bernie's Iowa victory was muddied, in the last 50 years, the person who wins the primary has almost always won one of the first 2 states. And with Nevada, Bernie had won the first 3 states. However, Bernie's New Hampshire win reignited negative headlines, and his Nevada win summoned even more, 72% negative. And while Bernie experienced a new plateau of disfavor following that win, only a few days later, Biden's South Carolina win was rewarded with 87% positivity going into Super Tuesday. The margin fluctuated between the sources. The LA Times came the closest to being even, the Washington Post was the most hostile toward Bernie, and CNN actually most favorable toward Biden. But every publication across the board gave Bernie majority negative headlines and Biden majority positive headlines. And you can see here that as a whole, they were more enthusiastically against Bernie than they were supportive of Biden. So first, what this does, in case you needed a reminder, it confirms beyond doubt that these publications have their biases. And this goes for cable news too. They're biased and probably have no actual awareness of how that bias could manifest. For example, I once found a clip of Joy Reid who felt secure in reminding viewers that Bernie voted for the '94 crime bill.
Who voted for the crime bill?
Who was voting the way the NRA wanted him to as a Vermont senator.
Obviously omitting all of the context which negates that as valid criticism. Particularly egregious considering Biden's role in the crime bill. Or, of course, Rachel Maddow asking Warren about the toxicity of Bernie supporters online, as if that wasn't already a mind-bendingly stupid topic to begin with. A computational social scientist from Harvard analyzed 6.8 million posts from supporters of the different candidates and found Bernie supporters were no more likely to make negative posts than supporters of anyone else. But as far as I can tell, that analysis never made it to air. Maddow, Reid, nobody else ever mentioned it. Though, as far as I could see, after the analysis of the 7 million posts came out, the phrase Bernie bro all but stopped being used on MSNBC. So who knows? Now, the extent to which disproportionately negative headlines tilted the scale, how positive would coverage have had to have been to overcome the centrist consolidation, we can't really know. But without a doubt, it was a piece of the puzzle. Now, I should also clarify that most of what was analyzed in the Medium post were the headlines, not the articles. The author did this because 60% of readers only read the headlines, so most of the time, it doesn't matter how positive an article may be, if the headline is negative, the piece is as good as negative. Now, in light of that, it should be said that journalists don't have final say over their headlines. A Twitter account everyone should follow is Editing the Gray Lady, and it just tracks changes in New York Times articles after publication. So for example, a March 12th article published was headlined, "Nadler, Ocasio-Cortez, and others in Congress call on Cuomo to resign." And that was changed to Cuomo says he won't bow to cancel culture and rejects calls to resign. There is no way the author came up with that second title, because the article itself has everything to do with the former and almost nothing to do with the latter. But if most people only read the headline, the body of the article is almost immaterial. So that being said, I'll link the Medium post in the description, give it a read. It's always nice to get a hard confirmation of the things that you suspect to be true, and I'll see you in the next one.